Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Assalamu alaikum. This is Brother Khalil Muhsin of the Lamppost Education Initiative, and we are happy to have this special live stream that we're doing to discuss the Bostock versus Clayton County Supreme Court decision. Today we're featuring Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, who is a teacher at the Lamppost, one of our main instructors at the Lamppost Education Initiative, and Brother Ismail Royer. He's also a board member of the Lamppost Education Initiative. It's important that these are a series of videos that we're doing to highlight and have special conversations around things that are happening within the Muslim community. So this is something that at Lamppost we feel that is very important for Muslims to become in tune with what's going on, and to see how our deen relates to the various issues that impact Muslims. Briefly, let me first read a very brief bio of our participants, and that's Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. He holds a PhD in Cultural and Historical Studies and Religion, and an MA in Ethics and Social Theory from Graduate Theological Union. He attained his BA at Jaza Ulia in Islamic Law from the prestigious Al-Qarawiyyin University in Fez, Morocco. He currently serves as an assistant professor of Islamic law and the prophetic tradition at Zaytuna College in Berkeley, California. And his research interest includes the interconnection between law, identity formation, comparative Islamic law, and Islam's role in the modern world. Brother Ismail Royer is a research and program associate at the Religious Freedom Institute, a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. He has studied the religious sciences with scholars like Dr. Jafar Sheikh Idris and Sheikh Muhammad Nur Abdullah, as well as with a student of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Arnaut, Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Arnaut. In June 2003, Brother Ismail Royer was indicted on terrorism-related offenses for assisting the Pakistan-based Lashkar al-Taiba, and ultimately pleaded guilty to weapon charges and violations. Since his release from prison in 2016, he has worked diligently with nonprofits to promote peace between faiths and undermine religious extremism. His writing has appeared in publications like the Washington Post, the Journal of Religion and Society, the Public Discourse, and the Detroit Free Press, Al-Juma, Muslim Matters, and the Lamppost Education Initiative. So right now, let me bring to our screen Brother Ismail and Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, and I'm going to leave the discourse here for a second. I'll be around, but I'm going to leave the discourse and have our guests have the discussion. So we'll be back, inshallah. And please listen carefully to this very important message, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khair.
Inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين نبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وارض عنا وارضنا يا رب العالمين. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank Brother Khalil for the introduction and all of your efforts and your hard work. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you for all that you do. And it's an honor today to be sharing this, I guess you'd say platform, I guess if you like to call it that, with my good beloved brother, Ismail Royer, Ustaz Ismail Royer. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve him.
Ameen.
And you know, alhamdulillah, he's also a board member. I can't remember if Brother Khalil mentioned that in your bio that you're a board member of Lamppost Education Initiative as well. And as we like to do often at Lamppost is we like to take on challenging issues, and it seemed like, you know, of course, we saw that you were a pretty good fit to that. Of course, he mentioned in your bio that you know, that after being released from prison because of the indictment, that you've been involved with many Muslim organizations. But what it doesn't mention is that prior to the indictment, you also were involved with many Muslim organizations. And of course, today we're here to talk about this particular Supreme Court verdict, which it came out recently. The two of us, of course, no secret to many people that we participated in a brief which challenged of course, the initial push by the employees or the plaintiffs in this particular case to undermine the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And I think probably a good place to begin in this conversation is to why don't you go ahead and just explain to us, like, what exactly were the issues, what were the cases, what actually happened, and those three main cases which were subject of this particular discussion. And while you're talking, I just want to, excuse me for a second, I just need to go grab my chargers on the side so I can plug it into my laptop. So I'm still listening. So
okay, all right. So Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. First, obviously, thank you so much, Brother Khalil, Ustad Khalil, and Dr. Abdullah Hamid Ali, for having me on. So I'm going to mention a little bit about my background, just so that people who are watching can understand that, you know, where I'm coming from. If you're going to see a doctor, you want to know what their, you know, credentials are, or hire a plumber or whatever. So I worked at the Council on American Islamic Relations from 1994 to October 2001 as a civil rights coordinator, civil rights specialist, and also media specialist. And in that capacity, I specialized in Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and other titles of the other sections of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which impact Muslims. So I've also even done a training for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the government agency that enforces Title VII. I've participated in Religious Freedom Restoration Act lawsuits as a plaintiff against the government, won in a case that went to trial against the government. So I have an extensive background in civil rights law. Now, what I'm about to...
I think that is good. It's extremely important. Those are really important points, because I think that that when people hear, okay, well, you know, this individual, he went to prison and he came out, and, you know, and as if like, okay, he's back now working, and he's working with the right, and it's like he must be, you know, some agent provocateur, things like, you know, what type of things that go in people's heads, you know. But when you sort of go back further, you make people realize, like, no, you've been Muslim for a long time. Yeah. And you've been involved with this work for a very long time. You're very passionate about this work, you know. So this was already your trajectory prior to everything that happened.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of the statutes that we're going to discuss today, and what I hope to do, by the way, in this discussion, what I hope we can do is really comprehensively get a handle on where this earth-shattering case leaves us, and not only this case by itself, but this case in context of the broader legal and cultural evolution that we are, as Muslims, we're forced to deal with. So with respect to what you just said about having had a long background in this, what's very interesting is that I worked for the American Muslim Council, an organization which does not exist anymore, but was one of the first Islamic advocacy groups, political advocacy groups in DC. And they were one of 3 Islamic organizations that were part of a coalition that got the Religious Freedom Restoration Act passed in 1991. So that law, we're going to describe that in a little bit more detail, and we're going to explain how incredibly important that law is with in connection with this case that we're going to talk about today. So let's first begin with Bostock versus Clayton County and its companion cases, Harris Funeral Homes and another case. So these were 3 cases that were all consolidated. The court kind of mushed them all together and dealt with them as one, because they all dealt with primarily with different aspects of the same thing, and that was Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed during the legal culmination of the civil rights movement in the 60s, and it was an incredibly important piece of legislation. This 1964 Civil Rights Act has different titles or different sections. The relevant ones that we're going to talk about today are Title VII, which deal with employment, and the other title, which is relevant that we'll talk about, which is Title II, and Title II deals with public accommodation. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. So Title VII, what Title VII originally did was that it, and it was amended in 1971, but what it did was it made it illegal for employers with 20 employees or above, in other words, sort of not tiny small businesses, but once you've got 20 employees, now this federal law applies to you. It made it illegal for employers to make adverse employment decisions about their employees. In other words, related to hiring, firing, promotion, pay. It made it illegal for them to discriminate on the basis of race, religion, national origin, and sex. So with respect to religion, it's very important because it also requires employers to reasonably accommodate the religious practices of their employees. Now, that doesn't quite come into play with what we're talking about today, except maybe tangentially. But it also, of course, makes it illegal for employers to say, "I'm not going to hire you, you're a Muslim. I'm not going to hire you, you're Jewish," and so on. So one of those factors that I mentioned was sex. That's a protected class under this federal law. Mm-hmm. So sex, when the law was, this is really interesting, when the law was originally passed, there was a white congressman who did not want this law to pass. He didn't want the Civil Rights Act to pass. So what he did was and the original law did not prohibit sex discrimination. So what he did was he introduced an amendment to the bill that would make the bill also, in addition to race and religion and national origin, would also make it illegal to discriminate on the basis of sex. He did not want to actually have discrimination illegal on the basis of sex, but he thought that no one would vote for this bill because he thought that everyone would the Congress would not tolerate passing a bill that would prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex.
Backfired.
Yeah, it backfired on him. Not only did the law pass to make it illegal to discriminate on the basis of race and religion and national origin, but also now became illegal to discriminate against on the basis of sex. So this is this what we're dealing with now in the aftermath of this is this congressman's clever move that he thought that he had, and it backfired on him. So obviously this is really critically important that the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed to address certain evils in society. This is where we deal with like the maqsad, or the purpose of the law. The purpose of the law was to try to undo Jim Crow through legislation, or at least aspects of it. So in employment, and also, as I said, in public accommodation, which prohibits businesses, places of public accommodation like hotels, like restaurants, from discriminating on the basis of race, religion, national origin. It does not mention sex, by the way. This is something we'll talk about. So Title VII says sex. What did they mean in 1964 when they passed discrimination on the basis of sex? They meant that employers now it is illegal for an employer to hire or fire based on the employee being a male or female. Mm-hmm. So also likewise, pay cannot be different. You can't promote people, and if there's evidence of discrimination in that, then the employer can be sued. And really quickly, I'll discuss the function, how that works. You can't just if you're discriminated against on the job, you can't just file a lawsuit by yourself, or if you believe you've been discriminated against, you can't just file a lawsuit by yourself. You have to ask permission from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is a government agency. They investigate the claim, you make the complaint to them, and they will do one of two things. They will either file a lawsuit on your behalf and litigate that case against you, which is what happened in one of the cases that were consolidated in this Supreme Court case that we're talking about today. And another issue is that another thing that they might do is, if they don't feel like you have a strong case or they don't want to devote resources to it, then they'll issue a letter giving you permission to sue. So that's how that works. So now, sex discrimination on the basis of sex did not. It has never been illegal under federal civil rights law for an employer to say, I'm not going to hire this person because they are practicing homosexual, or I'm not going to hire this person because they are a male who is claiming to be female. Federal discrimination law has never allowed that. In recent years, state discrimination laws have in 22, I think 22 states do not, as of this, who knows, this is up in the air now after this recent case, but 22 states do not make it illegal for employers to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. And until last week, federal law did not either. So what happened is that the LGBT movement, its activists or operatives, or if you will, began to put an effort in the legal system to try to create law that was in their favor, and there's nothing nefarious about that. That's what interest groups do, so they began to try to create law that interpreted the term sex as actually also forbidding discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity.
I gave pause right just 1 second.
Yes.
So I'm quite sure that people are listening. They'll say, okay, well, I get it. I understand where you're going with it, and I understand, okay, that the law itself, when it utilized the word sex in 1964, it meant, your biological sex, male or female, man or woman, right? Boy or girl. That's what it meant, right? And but they're listening to this talk, and they say, okay, well, then these Muslims, they submitted this brief challenging this attempt to sort of include or expand the definition of sex to include gender orientation or sexual orientation and gender identification. Right. It sounds like they're pretty bigoted. That these are very bigoted people. They want to discriminate against gay and transgender people. So why wouldn't they support this? Right. So.
Okay, so
that's definitely on the mind of a lot of people, and so I know a lot of Muslims' attitude is like, okay, well, it was one, counterproductive and perhaps even stupid for us to go out and challenge this law, right? So what would you sort of say to people? I don't mean to sort of take you off your.
No, that's okay. That's where I was going. Yeah, good. So just to sort of quickly shorten the story to where we got to today, and then I'll pick up on that. What happened is that there were several federal circuits. So the courts of appeals are divided into circuits: First Circuit, Second. So there was a split between the circuits. They have their own sort of jurisprudence. So several circuits were persuaded by the argument of the LGBT activists and legal arguments that in order to discriminate, if an employer, this is the argument, if an employer is to say, I'm not going to hire you because you are a man, actually in reality, but you're dressing as a woman or you're presenting as a woman, that when an employer does that, they are in fact taking into account sex. In other words, that if this was a woman dressing as a woman, then the employer would not have a problem. But this is a man dressing as a woman, and so the employer is taking into account the manness of this employer, and therefore that is because of sex. So you see that this is sort of a stretch. It's a ta'wil ba'id, of this law. Yeah, but they persuaded judges who, they persuaded judges that this was the plausible, and in fact, only possible interpretation of this law, even though the legislators, Congress did not originally intend this to encompass that meaning, but that in fact, by operation of language and so on, that it really does cover it. Now, what happened with when this case, several cases reached the Supreme Court. The court granted certiorari, meaning that the court agreed to actually hear these cases and to decide on them, and consolidated these three. One of them was dealing with a transgender person who was a man and now was saying that he was a woman, and was fired from his Christian faith-based funeral home. He was a funeral director, and he was fired by his by the family-owned business because they felt that this was not appropriate to have a funeral director dealing with grieving families who, essentially were Christians. They were serving a Christian clientele, and that they would not, that this person just didn't meet their ethical, standard.
Yeah, so like it's one thing, already a family's grieving because
Right.
they lost a loved one, and then now they come to the funeral, and the funeral home director they're further traumatized because now here's a man dressed up in a woman's dress.
Right.
They have to deal with this at a Christian institution. They themselves are Christian. And so there's expectations that if you're working for a Christian institution, then you should represent the values of that institution.
Precisely right. Exactly. That's why people go to a Christian funeral home or a Muslim funeral home or whatever, or decide not to go to any particularly religious funeral home because they don't care. So some people care, some people don't care, So then two of the other cases that were brought into this were cases where the employee was fired on the basis, in fact, discriminated against on the basis of their avowed professed sexual relations with other men. The opinion. This is where we come in. I became aware through my organization I work at, the Religious Freedom Institute. I became aware that the lawyers for the employers in this case, and in fact, in this case, the funeral home director, the funeral home that, and by the way, I ended up meeting the owner of that funeral home at a lunch. But anyway, so they asked us if we would be interested in presenting a Muslim perspective, the Islamic perspective, on gender identity. So we did not, our brief did not deal with the issue of homosexuality, but another brief filed by Muslims, Sunni Muslims, did do that and very well represented that. That was an attorney, Talib Karim, an African-American brother in DC, a very old school, well-known brother who organized a response by various other Muslim leaders to deal with that issue of homosexuality. Our brief filed with yourself, Sheikh, and also Sheikh Amin Khawadia of Dar al-Qasim. And there were other voices that had input into that as well. I'll mention that It was actually originally drafted by a sister, a Syrian refugee, who is getting her law degree, and she's a law student. And I can't. She asked me not to mention her name because she is afraid that her career will be ruined if it were known. But she wrote this brief as a woman. So here's the thing: our brief was focusing on this issue. It was focusing on, number one, and first of all, let me explain what an amicus brief is really quick. An amicus curiae brief, that's a Latin term meaning friend of the court. So that's a brief filed by someone who is not a party to the case. So we're not like the people who are suing or being sued, but we are someone who is not a party to the case, but we are filing this brief with the court in this case in order to give the court a perspective that they might not otherwise have. And so we provided to them a brief that was describing what were going to be the real world consequences if the court was going to do what it was being asked to do, which is to redefine the term sex to include sexual orientation and gender identity. We explained that if the court were to say that discrimination on the basis of gender identity is illegal, then what is going to happen is it is going to put Muslim businesses, Muslim-owned businesses, faith-based organizations like advocacy groups or whatever, relief organizations and so on, faith-based organizations, schools, very critically important schools, and mosques, is going to put them in a position where they are going to, not to mention just the corner store, if they've got more than 20 employees, the funeral home, there are Muslim funeral homes and so on. It's going to put them in the position that they're going to have to be required to hire men who are claiming to be women and women who are claiming to be men. What's going to happen in that situation is that, first of all, it's going to affect Muslim women, actual real women who are who want to use the bathroom, for example, and then a man comes in to the bathroom claiming to be a woman, demanding access to that bathroom. And that if the employer does not allow that employer can be sued and his business can be shut down. And if the employer doesn't hire that person and that's going to put Muslim women into a very bad situation because Muslim women, first of all, are not allowed religiously to be alone in a room with a strange man, much less, Muslim women often will take off their hijab and fix their hair and adjust that, or for that matter, using the restroom next to a man. And so this is going to put, and here another very important issue is that when you think of locker rooms, if men are going to be allowed into locker rooms where women, use the bathroom. Another aspect which actually was not mentioned in our brief is that if, let's say, you've got an Islamic school and the school is forced to hire a gym teacher who is a man but is pretending to be a woman, and this man is now teaching the Muslim young girls how to stretch and play volleyball and all these kinds of things, and this is a man. And in our religion, our religion reflects reality, and the reality is that when God created us in the womb as a male or a female, and that this is immutable. This cannot be changed. Now, of course, we know the issue of the intersex person. That is a separate issue. That is not, in fact, what we're discussing at all. That has its own fiqh rulings, and that's not at issue. What's at issue here is the so-called transgenderism. So. Right. So
that's like, for instance, our detractors would say, okay, well, a lot of these possibilities you're talking about just simply, this is all speculation, because we're really all we're concerned with right here. All these people, the only thing they're concerned with right now is fairness, equal treatment, right? Equal employment. That's all they're concerned with, right? So why would you be against that? And all of these other things you're talking about, that those are things you deal with them when they happen, but this is not going to do that, and then you even have some Muslims who've written me and said, okay, well, the only thing that Muslim organizations really need to be concerned about when it comes to these issues are, those areas of their particular, I should say, the operations which have no religious significance. So, for instance, they say you have a janitor, right? Now, your janitor doesn't have to be Muslim, doesn't necessarily have to adhere to certain types of moral standards, right? So for instance, your janitor comes in, if that has to be transgender, or has to be a gay person, then you really, then you get in trouble for that, but this law is not really interfering in your religious, in areas of the religious sphere. You're not talking about forcing you to have a gay imam or having, a transgender, Islamic teacher and things like that, but how would you sort of respond to those type of arguments?
Okay, so this type of argument, I mean, first of all, at least that type of argument is conceding that for things such as the imam, things such as staff in schools and in the mosques that are directly involved in religious teachings, that Muslims should have a right, or religious people should have a right to be able to say that they will not hire someone who is openly practicing same-sex relations with men, or someone who claims to be transgender. So that's great, and that's an important, at least core issue that we can agree on. And I also want to mention that there is that those types of roles in Islamic schools, in mosques, are protected by something called the ministerial exception. So the ministerial exception is, it comes under the First Amendment. It's something that the Supreme Court has articulated, which says that the First Amendment does not allow the government to have any say whatsoever over religious institutions over ministers. Okay, so they use the term ministers. Of course, we Muslims don't use the term ministers. So the question is, what is a minister? There is, at this point, there are two cases in front of the Supreme Court now, and which should be where it should be decided by next week, which explains the scope of who is covered by that. So what I mean by that is that obviously the imam is covered by that. This Bostock decision cannot reach the imam position. However, what about a history teacher that opens the class with dua, or that is mixing discussing seerah as well as discussing secular history? What about again, what about the gym teacher who is ostensibly not teaching anything about religion, but maybe teaching akhlaq, behavior and manners and so on. And
well, the other part too, I would add it to that too, is do you find it often at religious institutions that there's a code of ethics that every individual who joins that institution is expected to live in accord with, right? So for instance, let's say at a college, a Muslim college, you have code of ethics for your students, you have code of ethics for your employees, and either on and off, right? Campus, right? That they're expected to live up to those standards, and if they don't, then they can be fired. So for instance, that can be something like dating, of course, extramarital affairs, things like that, and becomes a basis for firing, based upon the rules of that tradition. So to me, I can see that this law potentially reaching this aspect of those operations as well, because while it's okay, it's not that people are against having non-Christians or non-Muslims work at their particular institutions, but they expect that the individuals who work at institutions, regardless of what their religious beliefs are, that they themselves, they create or contribute to the religious environment, the moral sort of like community that exists there, right?
And I mean, and first of all, let's be clear that no Muslim should expect to be hired at a Catholic school or a synagogue. You know what I mean? If they do hire a Muslim as as the lunch lady, or as a janitor, or as even the English teacher, great. But if they choose not to, that's not discrimination in the same way that, if I were to go try to apply at, Federal Express or something, and they said, "Oh, you're Muslim, we're not going to hire." That's a very different situation. So religious people have to have some understanding for one another, and likewise, if someone is not a Muslim and wants to come and work in, and as a matter of fact, by the way, Title VII, this is the point. Actually, Title VII has a specific exemption. The reason this is not even an issue when it comes to religion is because Title VII has an exemption that says that religious schools and religious institutions are not, they are exempt from discriminating on the basis of religion. In other words, if someone who is a Hindu, for example, not picking on Hindus, but if someone is a Hindu and wants to and applies to work in an Islamic school, the Islamic school can say, "We are sorry, but we only hire Muslims," and the school is immune from Title VII. Why? Because Title VII was drafted with maximum respect for the autonomy of religious institutions. And so therefore it allows it, but it does not allow discrimination on the basis of sex. So you cannot say, for example, we're going to pay our male English teacher 5 times more than we're going to pay our female teacher. That's not allowed under Title VII. There's no exemption there. So therefore, what that means, and courts have been very clear about that. They said you can discriminate on the basis of race on the basis of religion, but not on race. You can't say, for example, we're religious and so therefore we're going to hire white people. No, you can't do that. That's not allowed under Title VII. That's illegal. And likewise, it's illegal to discriminate on the basis of sex unless it is something related to the occupational requirements of that job. So, for example, a priest or an imam cannot be a woman, in our respective religions. So, therefore, it's not discrimination. But if there's an issue where there is there's nothing tied to that specific thing. So it's very important to understand that our society and the way that law was originally written took into account that there were going to be these sort of differences of opinion that needed to be respected when they are legitimate. Now, what people need to understand and what Muslims need to understand, regardless of this is 2020, it's very different than it was 1920 or even 1990. Muslims need to remember that sodomy is a grievous sin. Allah destroyed a city for that. This is not, and even if someone is one of these new age progressive, understandings of Islam and says, no, that's really not what Islam really, at least they can, if they're going to want to be liberal, right, then what they're going to do is they're going to have to understand that there are other people who disagree with that. So that's your view, but that's not everyone's view. The view of the Muslims has been for 1400 years, and in fact for Christians and Jews before that, has been that sodomy is an abomination. And so it's not the same for a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew who says, I don't want to hire someone who is admittedly committing sodomy in their life. I don't want that person working in my religious school. I don't want that person. Now, I'll be very kind to that person. I will, if they're my neighbor, I'll extend all my all the rights to them that they're due. But I do not want in my business, which is an expression of myself and my own ethics and my life, living my life in the public square. I do not want to endorse. I don't want to endorse that to the public, thinking that I approve of that. And I just don't want to. I mean, like I would not want a Ku Klux Klan member working for me. If I found out that someone was a Ku Klux Klan member after like Googling them and they had applied, I'd say, you know what, you're morally repugnant. I don't want to hire you. I mean, good luck to you, but you're not working here. So likewise. And then someone might say, "Oh, how can you compare a Ku Klux Klan member to someone who's yeah, right? Oh, that's not a. But in fact, in actual fact, sodomy is a major sin. It's a major sin, and so the Muslim, his religion and her religion is not simply something that you go home and you pray and you and then you leave the home and you left your religion back at home. That's a secular modern way of looking at. That's in fact derived from the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment and so on. A Muslim is someone whose every ethical choice is dictated by their religion.
Right.
Now it might be that hiring someone like that might be in the interest of the religion, if I thought that might give me an opportunity to give them da'wah and to talk to them about and to show, to soften their heart and maybe to try to persuade them away from what they're doing. I don't know if that was my decision, but we should be allowed. I was in a debate with someone who had there was a group of Muslims who filed a brief on the opposite side against us. So Dr. Muhammad Fadl, who is a scholar of Islam and the law in Canada, and a very, very interesting debate. It's on Facebook, and maybe we can post some of that. And Ustad Mubin Vaid got involved in it as well. And so much of this has we discussed back and forth, and so one can look at the back and forth and see whose arguments they thought were more compelling. But he was bringing up a few different points. Number one, he's pointing out he's bringing up the point that, well, employers, first of all, he's in Canada. I know he's actually studied American law, but I think he may not fully, with due respect to him, may not fully grasp the American way of doing things. He is saying that employers should not be able to make hiring decisions on the basis of factors that are not relevant to employment. So he says, well, how is it relevant to, say, for example, a Muslim kebab shop owner? How is it relevant to him that his cook is or his hostess at the restaurant or something is actually a man or something? How is that relevant? Well, how does that affect their employment? Well, first of all, I pressed him on this issue and said, well, so you're saying that a Klan member would be able to, people shouldn't be able to fire a Klan member, Right. And he was pushed to say, oh no, they should be able to, so you're
okay for some, but not for others.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Why? Because it's very understandably and justifiably not condemned in society today to be a Klan member, and it should be condemned. But no one today, as reflected by this Supreme Court decision, very few people would be comfortable admitting that they just find that a lifestyle immoral, and you don't want that person working with them. And so that's really what it is. It's the question is, do we want to allow people to exercise their ethical decisions in their entire lives, in every aspect of their life, or do we want them to do that in the house? Now, this leads to a really, really other critical point, which is someone could say, oh yeah, well, what if someone says that it's part of their religion that they don't want to hire African Americans, and that they have their religion that white people are superior, and they define, or they don't want to hire someone who is white, but they're in a relationship with an African American, and for them that's violating their somehow religious beliefs or something like that. Well, the very simple answer to that is that is not something that is analogous to sodomy. It is not
one's an appetite. Appetite. One is a natural, inborn characteristic, right? Even if people try to claim otherwise, So
exactly. Society, until very recently, society made a very just distinction between racial characteristics and which is what someone is, and then what someone does. So if a person is committing sodomy, that person is doing something. But if a person is an African American, that's who they are. That's how God created them. Well, someone could say God created people to be attracted to men. That might be true, but God also created people to be to have murderous impulses. God created people to have impulse control when it came to committing adultery
or rape.
or rape or stealing, and so on. And so these are all sins. These are all major sins, or lying. And so just because one has an impulse to do something doesn't mean that
you have to act upon it.
that is therefore moral. And so we as Muslims, we have the utmost respect and and we respect the dignity of anyone who has those kind of impulses and resist them. The one who has an impulse to be attracted to someone of the same sex and then resists it is the same level of jihad, the same level of struggle against the nafs, against the soul, as the one who is resisting any temptation that they are afflicted with. And not a single one of us, human beings alive today, does not suffer from some compulsive shaitan impulse in our ears and our hearts whispering to us. So, so
this is an important topic. I mean, we talk about the issue of sodomy and just the whole the issue of homosexuality overall. That to me, I think this is an important concern as well with regard to why I felt it important to sign on to the brief itself. And it's when we go back to the Supreme Court verdict about gay marriage, for starters, remember back then, they would said, okay, well, that we just want marriage equality. We just want to be treated equal to heterosexuals, right? And of course, many people were out saying, well, no, it's a Trojan horse. Realistically, it's going to turn into a whole lot of other things. And they said, no. We're only concerned with it's only about gay marriage. This is all we always want marriage equality, want the same benefits everyone else has. But then look at where we are now, right? That they got the right to marry one another, and then it turned into now indoctrinating the entire society into gender theology, gender theory and theology, compelling speech, indoctrinating children into these things, issues in the area of adoption. There are a lot of issues that come up, right?
Medicine.
What they did was they focus on redefining the word marriage rather than simply, focusing on, we want to be able to do the same thing, but they said, no, that's not enough. No, we want to actually redefine what marriage is, right? And similarly, this is what we see happening in this particular case. Is instead of saying, okay, well, let's focus on trying to pass a new law that would bar an employer from discriminating against people who are gay or transgender, right? Rather, no, we're going to redefine what sex is. Because that's fundamentally what's happened in this case. A lot of people don't see that.
So, what was your contribution to this brief as we were drafting it? Was one of the things that you put in there was so important, and that was the necessity of standing up for reality. So in this age of postmodernism, in this age in which the very notion of objective reality is repulsive to many people. I mean, the very notion of objective truth is offensive. That what you did and what we did in our brief was we said Islam stands for reality, and the reality is that let's just be clear here. The reality is that one cannot change one's sex.
Right.
The sex that you were born with is the sex that you will have when you die, and it does not matter what surgery or what clothes you wear, the makeup you wear, the hormone treatments you get, will never do anything more than make someone's secondary sexual characteristics resemble those of the opposite sex. I mean, so to pretend like that's not, now we have the ACLU putting out slogans like not all women have a vagina, or not all women have uterus. Uterus. I mean, this is a rebellion against reality. This is a rebellion against the created order.
Right.
So what we did with this brief is we not only stood up for the rights of Muslim business owners, Islamic schools, mosques, and so on, but we are also standing up for reality itself. And as Muslims, we have to be those people who speak the truth. We are required to speak the truth. We're required, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it goes against the grain. And so to those Muslims who, who find that offensive or whatever, I mean, that's the path that we.
Yeah, well, the thing about it. I say the thing about it is that people, they see what we're doing as an attempt to discriminate. Right. But no, what we're doing is trying not to be discriminated against, right? Because fundamentally, we see ourselves as the weaker party. We are the weaker group, right? We are the disempowered, right? The Muslims, the religious factions in America or in the world today, they are the disempowered. The secular powers, they have the greater influence, and so they're imposing their understanding of the human being upon the rest of the world, right? They're redefining what the human being is, and it starts with redefining words, among other things. So, for instance, we didn't speak about this yet, but even the opinion of the court, which was offered by Justice Gorsuch, that particular opinion, which fundamentally he really tried in very fancy language to make it sound as if he was offering a traditionalist interpretation of the law itself, right? 1964 Title VII, right? And so he expanded it, and so appropriately in Justice Alito's his dissent, he highlighted that fundamentally what has happened here is a violation of the Supreme Court's mandate. The Supreme Court's mandate is to interpret the law, not to create or to legislate, right? And so fundamentally, he made it clear, said, that what you have done here is legislated, right? When you're not, that's not what our mandate is, right? So to try to make this clear, I want to give this example to bring it home for many Muslims who are in our own context. So is that, okay, we have the three powers of the government, we have the legislative, executive, and the judicial branch. And this course is just in general, right? It's basic, as I possibly can break it down, and this better than I do. But the legislative branch, they make laws. The judicial branch, they interpret laws. The executive branch, they execute, they enforce the law, right? So so we can think of the legislative branch, or Congress, is like we say the fuqaha. These are like the jurists, right? And the jurists, the job of the jurists is to extrapolate law from the sources, right? We have the Constitution, and then you have the justice, the Supreme Court justices. They're like mufassirin, right? They're like interpreters of the law. So, for instance, and in tafsir, there's a lot of focus on words, right? What they mean in their proper context, and it's not to say that this is the only thing the Supreme Court does, but this is a large part of what they do. So fundamentally, think about it like this. The fuqaha, they look at the text and they're trying to, they're looking for what is the maqsad, what is the goal of the law itself, and they are looking for analogs, right, within the sources in order to extend the law to something different or a new issue, right? Right. So they're concerned with those type of things. This is what their concern should be, right? But in the area of tafsir, if I come across a word like that divorcees are to wait for 3 quru, which these ulama, they differed about what exactly the word qara or the quru meant. Was it a reference to women's the time when they're bleeding during the menstrual cycle or when they stop bleeding, right? Then the mufassir, right, or especially a legal mufassir, he is or she is going to say, okay, because of this or that particular circumstance, we believe that this is exactly what was meant by this word in this particular time, in this particular context, right? And so fundamentally what the opinion of the court did was fundamentally take on the role of the fuqaha, right? When they should be mufassirin, right? So I think that's a good way to describe what happened, at least in my view. I think you probably would agree with that.
You reminded me of what Imam Shafi'i said about istihsan. He said, فَمَنْ اسْتَحْسَنَ فَقَدْ شَرَعَ.
Right.
So that's what they're looking for, the istihsan. They're trying to they're trying to achieve a goal, of I don't know, like equality and so on.
Yeah.
And in doing so, they legislated.
Right.
So that's what Justice Alito said. He said this is legislation. This leads us to a really, really important next point here, which is that for several years there has been a bill in Congress that the Democrats have been trying to get pushed through, called the Equality Act. In the same way that the Patriot Act, how could you be against the Patriot Act? You must not be a patriot.
Right.
How could you be against the Equality Act? You must not be for equality. And being equality for equality is the aqeedah of our time. Everything has to be equal, allegedly, between men and women and so on. So, but good and evil are not equal, as Allah says in the Quran. So the Equality Act, what the Equality Act wanted to do and is supposed to have done, and it never passed, but has not passed yet, was to change the meaning of sex in the Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act to include sexual orientation and gender identity. So it's supposed to do some other things too, which I'll discuss in a second. So what Justice Alito did was he said this law has been stagnating in Congress for years, and so what the court did was it just decided to graft that bill onto Title VII and do an end run around Congress. So that's exactly what happened. The representatives of the people the people are supposed to be the ones that are making laws, and these representatives are supposed to represent that. The people did not want that law, and so the justices imposed it anyway. Now, what's really important to notice is that the Equality Act would not only have done what Bostock just did. So essentially, that part of the Equality Act is already moot. I mean, it's already it's already in effect. The court just passed it essentially. But there are other aspects to it. First of all, it would eliminate the Religious Freedom Restoration Act as a defense to suit against on the basis of discrimination on sex, which includes now sexual orientation and gender identity. What does that mean? It means if you go, like I mentioned to you, that we have these debates on Facebook. If you look between Muhammad Fadl, and maybe we can post a link to that and sure. Others. So one of the things he was saying was, what's the big deal? He's saying these these Islamic schools or these Islamic businesses, they can just, like the halal store or the jilbab store or something, they can just say that under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, they should not be subject to suit on the basis of not wanting to hire someone who is a man dressed as a woman or someone who commits sodomy. And so the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, as I mentioned in the very beginning, is a very important law. Let me just very, very quickly mention it. Okay, so before 1991, the Supreme Court interpreted the First Amendment to mean that if the government is going to interfere with the religious rights of or the religious practices of the people, then it has to have that interference has to meet certain criteria. One of them is it has to be the least restrictive means of interfering, and that's probably the most important aspect of that. Meaning that the government, if the government has a law that says peyote, the drug that comes from cactuses that Native Americans, certain Native American faiths see as a sacrament, that peyote is illegal. It's an illegal drug. The government is making it illegal. So now that has the effect of impinging on the religious practices of Native American faith, certain Native American faiths. So what happened is that someone was denied employment benefits on the basis of a conviction for peyote, and what this person tried to say was that, well, that's because I'm a Native American, that was part of my religion, and I shouldn't be punished for participating in my religious beliefs. That's a violation of my First Amendment rights. Well, what the court did in 1991 was they said our jurisprudence in the past was wrong. Now we've decided that, in fact, the government can impose upon your religious beliefs when it's like a neutral law like that affects everyone, but it just happens to affect you. The government can impose on you. And it doesn't have to be in the least restrictive means possible or anything like that. It can do it can do that as long as it's a neutral law and so on and so on. Right. So what happened is that there was a huge outcry after that Supreme Court decision, and Congress passed through the efforts of many religious organizations and secular organizations, including the ACLU, and 3 Islamic organizations: American Muslim Council, National Organization of Muslim Women, or something, and then another Muslim veterans group or something. They all joined in pushing for this law to be passed, which restored, by statute, it restored the former court's jurisprudence on the First Amendment. Meaning that if you, I'll give you a recent example. The Trump administration prosecuted someone who was leaving food and water in the desert for migrants who were crossing the border. The Trump administration prosecuted them for aiding and abetting something or other, right?
Legal entry into the country. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So their defense was that RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act, says that this can be used as a defense against prosecution, criminal prosecution. So they said, hey, I'm a Christian, and it's part of my religious beliefs to feed people in distress like this. So, and the court threw it out. The court agreed. The court said this Religious Freedom Restoration Act prohibits the government from prosecuting this individual through the case out. Now, in what the Equality Act does is it specifically says that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act cannot be used as a defense against a suit for discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. So that if the uncle running the kebab store, and he's got 20 more employees, let's say, big operation, big catering operation, doesn't want to hire someone on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, and they are sued. They cannot say it's part of my religion that I am in my ethics that this is unlawful, and I don't want to allow this. They can't do that if this Equality Act is passed. And the Equality Act is being pushed by this Muslim Advocates, which is the same progressive organization that filed the brief on the behalf of the employees in this case. Okay, right. So the issue here is that, and Dr. Fadl is on the board of that organization. Right. So you cannot say, oh, don't worry about it. There's RFRA, there's Religious Freedom Restoration Act, when your organization is working to undermine it. Right, yeah. And 2 days after the Bostock decision, the Democrats tried to resurrect the Equality Act and tried to get it brought up for a vote and pushed through with the momentum that they had received from this Bostock decision. So they're playing to win. The other side is playing to win.
Yeah, that's why they focus on the culture. I mean, the academy, both the University Academy and Hollywood and others. They have them. You're pretty much on lockdown. They've convinced media. So many mainstream media, so many other platforms that are available to them. That's why I say again that those of us who are religious and we're trying to cling on to traditional morality, that we ourselves, those who are more vulnerable parties, that we're the underprivileged, we're the ones who are under attack. So it's really interesting how the more powerful group actually is claiming that we're trying to undermine their rights, right? When in fact it's the opposite happening.
So the critical thing here to understand is that the idea of a neutral an ideologically neutral public square is false. It's a fiction.
Right.
It is not the case that the other side wants some sort of neutral square where all ideas are accepted, where all epistemologies are equally valid, where or at least tolerated. At least we can all live together in a sort of modus vivendi, a sort of way of living together. No, they don't want that. What they want is they want to have the dominant anthropology. They want to have the dominant view of what a human being is, of what sex is, of what the purpose of family is, of what the purpose of sexual relations are, of what the foundation of the society and the order is, whether it's going to be God or it's going to not be God. So they're
willing to even use force in order to do so. I mean, do you have a did you bring that clip?
Yeah, I have a video here. Yeah, so I'm gonna
do it before, but I think it's important for people to see this.
I'm gonna play this. This is the video of me. I was at the Supreme. Yeah, I was at the Supreme Court for the oral arguments, and I spoke at outside the Supreme Court on next to the lawyers for the employers in this case. And you can see from this video that from the way that this that I was being shouted down, that they're not interested in equality. They're not interested in in live and let live. They want to win. And by the way, let me mention, and as I was explaining in here, if we were to win, okay, if our side was dominant as their side is now becoming dominant, then we would at least make room, to some extent.
They make accommodation.
Accommodate that. I mean, I might not hire you, but it's not really any of my business. Like, I'm not going to, someone comes into my store or something and says, and wants to buy something, and I perceive them as being homosexual. And I don't even how you know that, but let's say I perceive that or something like that. I'm not going to be rude to them. I'm not going to be mean to them. I'm not going to exclude them from society. But whereas now here's the really important thing. If you express the views that we expressed in our brief, in a legal brief in the Supreme Court, you can be fired. I mean, you and I are blessed to work in places where we're not, we don't suffer consequences like that in our lives. At least right now. I mean, I might. Or for example, the lawyers for the employers in this case. The Alliance Defending Freedom, they have been declared a hate group by the SPLA, not the SPLA, that's the
SPLC.
SPLC, that's the Sudanese.
Right.
I'm mixing things here. Yeah. The SPLC has declared them a hate group. And the SPLC in their earlier in their career did a lot of good. But now you're a hate group if you're just a lawyer. And this organization has won dozens of cases in front of the Supreme Court, and they're labeled a hate group by the organization. So let me play this video. And I'm going to try to do some screen sharing here.
Yeah.
Just bear with me. Okay, so share screen. Let me know if you can see. Okay, yes, share screen. All right, now. All right, can you see this?
I can't see it.
Okay.
Maybe Brother Khalil can see it. I'm not sure.
Khalil, is this coming out to people here? All right, let's. Sorry for the delay, folks. We're just getting used to StreamYard here. Khalil, are you on the? All right. All right. Well, you know what? Let me try and.
There he is.
Yes, it's not showing up, but I'll try to pull it up.
Okay, so our engineer is going to bring that up for us, inshallah. Oh, wait a minute. Sure. Okay.
Do you have it?
Yeah, I got it. This is worth seeing. Can you guys see this?
No, I'm not seeing it.
All right. Well, Khalil, if you can, try to bring it up. I think we're close to the end of our time here. If not, we'll just post it, inshallah, somewhere on a link to it.
Yeah, but the main point is just that, 1992.
Yeah, we can hear it, but that was about it.
Okay, I'm going to share it in 1 second. Give me a second. I thought you would be able to.
I thought so too. It's not working somehow. All right.
Yeah, but again, but the main point is just that that. Oh, okay.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, there we go. This is like an inception or something here.
All right, we'll start from the beginning.
Yeah. So it's about 1.5 minutes long.
Yeah, we should watch the whole thing. Yes.
Yeah. But we're not hearing any volume.
Okay, I'm working on that now.
Okay. There we go. Perfect. Start right there.
In the name of God, the most gracious and most merciful. First, I wanted to ask if you could possibly let people talk, because people over there are able to talk, and so you should let people talk. So I wanted to address the crowd. My name is Ismail. I'm director of the Islamic and Religious Freedom section at the Religious Freedom Institute. We're a multi-faith organization that exists to protect the religious freedom of everyone. So that's terrible, right? So we filed a brief in this case in order to support the family, a faith-based family. You should talk to the police about it. I can't help you there. I can't help you now. So we filed a brief in this case to support the right of a faith-based Christian family to run its business as they wish. And we have to, as Americans, find a way to find some middle ground where we respect one another. So your right needs to be respected, but you should also respect the right of those who choose to run their businesses in the way that they see fit. And not the American way. This is not the American way. The American way is to be allowed people to speak. And I think it's very obvious here which is the right side. It's very obvious here which side is respecting people's rights. And you have the right to say that, and I have the right to say that. What I'm saying, and the families that run their businesses according to their religions, and churches, and mosques, and synagogues all have the right to run their organizations in the way that they wish to run them. And so I ask God to bring healing to this country and to stop the division. And I ask God to bring healing to your faith. And thank you for having me. And may God give victory to the right side here.
Now, you know what's pretty interesting about that whole incident, and I think it'll be, we definitely need to share the link. I think because it didn't come out the sounds of what the woman actually was saying and how loud she was. It didn't come out as clearly as it would if you see the link.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is that we live in a time where they tell you that words are violence. And if that's true, then in this particular case, it's very clear whose words were violence.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't. They weren't your words.
Yeah. And by the way, I went and tried to talk to this lady afterwards. I stepped down and I said, "Ma'am, I just wanted to have a conversation with you so that you might understand where I was coming from." And she was screaming in my face. And then some other lady came up and started screaming to her, "Don't engage! Don't engage! Don't engage!" That's and let me say that where they came from a counter rally where Muslim Advocates was. Muslim Advocates was over at their rally on their side, demonstrating, and okay, no, Muslim Advocates didn't themselves discriminate, come and try to do that to us, But the point is that it's very strange to have Muslims on that side. I mean, why would you have?
What are they advocating for? Muslim advocates advocating for non-Islamic, un-Islamic stuff, right? And even the tactics themselves are not Islamic.
And not only that, and then to try to shut down any kind of speech whatsoever that dissents. I mean, it's the opposite of what they're claiming that they're for.
You know, another thing I think before we move towards closing, because I think this is all in line with what wanted to convey our concerns to the Muslim community about this this verdict. Among other things, and that's the quote I'd asked you about from that book. That I think is very insightful about like what much of this is all about. If you could find it and read that to us, or share it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me see if I can find that. And while I'm looking for that, I'm going to look for that. I just wanted to also summarize, I think, some practical, let's say, practical nuggets of information that Islamic organizations, mosques, and Muslim-owned businesses might want to take away from this. In other words, like, what is you hear us sounding the alarm. We're obviously advocates for a certain side, and so we have a interest, one might think, in portraying the sky as if it's falling. What is the practical impact here? And I'm saying this while I'm simultaneously looking up this thing. So first of all, what can you, as a Muslim business owner or organization or mosque or school administrator, expect to happen here? Well, that depends in large part, first of all, on how broadly the Supreme Court defines the ministerial exception. In this case, it's going to be coming out in a week or two. But even that case, and even the lawyers in that case, which is, by the way, Alliance Defending Freedom, the same lawyers as in the other one. No, excuse me, it's Beckett. It's not. Anyway, they are not even arguing that the ministerial exception should apply to gym teachers, for example. Why? Because for them, Christians, I think it doesn't really matter as much. They don't have the same issue of men being with women in alone and so on. So what we can expect is, regardless of what that case decides next week, what we can expect is that if a transgender person or someone defining themselves as transgender comes and applies at your Islamic school or at your mosque, and they're applying for a position that is not, let's say, like a ministerial position that is not defined as part of their job description is in providing religious instruction overtly, then most likely you are exposed to a lawsuit under Title VII, and you can try to there are certain ways that you might be able to try to shield yourself, but there's going to be a lot of litigation involved in that. It's going to cost you money, and it's going to be long, and it's going to be drawn out. The question is, how common is that? We don't know, because there are just far fewer Muslims in the United States than there are Christians, and so therefore there's just fewer incidents of this type of thing happening. But we know that there are organizations out there that are promoting this sort of thing within the Muslim community, and it's quite possible that they will send someone to an organization to test them. But we know, though, at the same time, that the left and the people who fund these sorts of things are deliberately not targeting Muslims at this stage of the game, and so it's as a strategic move. So there may not be that kind of money behind that sort of lawsuit that there would be behind organizations going after Christian bakers or something like that. So it's possible that Muslims will be off the hook. But if one of these people writes to the temporarily, but if one of these people writes to the EEOC and says, hey, these guys didn't hire me because I'm transgender. This school didn't hire me, and I'm trying to be the lunch lady, or I'm trying to be the receptionist, or I'm trying to be the gym teacher. Then you could be exposed to that. Now, as I said, you might have some defenses, but that's going to be. Now, what about Muslim businesses? What about Muslim-owned businesses like, again, the halal store or the jilbab store or a caterer or something like that? Your protections are much less. Almost certainly, there's no ministerial exception there for you. And if the Religious Freedom Restoration Act is, if the Equality Act passes, as the Democrats are promising to pass it, and the only reason it has not passed yet is because of Republicans in the Senate. And by the way, I'm not endorsing Republicans. I'm just saying that this, as a force of just real, actual politics in life, it just so happens that their opposition to that coincides somewhat. So that's not going to happen. But in November, if they lose the Senate, then this bill is going to become law. And there are some other possibilities that could happen down the road, and if those happen, or if anything changes, then we will inshallah keep everyone updated. But that's the situation that we're in. I found that quote. So here's the quote. This quote I'm going to read is from a book called After the Ball. After the Ball was written by a Harvard professor who was a major force in the LGBT ideology movement, and he wrote this in the 80s, late 80s, I think 89 or something. And it was a roadmap. He wrote this as a strategy roadmap for the LGBT movement. Even though it's true that probably the modern LGBT movement, everyone involved in it, that this is not like a Protocols of the Elders of Zion or some kind of conspiracy theory, but it is true that this line of thinking that they laid out here was very much, it caught on, it resonated, and it has been followed. So here's a quotation from it. He says, "The public should be persuaded that gays are victims of circumstance, that they no more choose their sexual orientation than they did their height, skin color, talents, or limitations. We argue that for all practical purposes, gays should be considered to have been born gay, even though sexual orientation for most humans seems to be the product of a complex interaction between innate predispositions and environmental factors during childhood and early adolescence." I don't know if you followed what I just said, but they're admitting in 89, they're saying that people are not born gay. Right. That this is a product of a combination of innate predisposition and environmental factors. If you were to say that now, you would be called a bigot. But they, at that time, they acknowledged it and they admitted it. And this is a great example of how reality can be changed and paradigms can be changed. So now, but they're saying that for strategic purposes, the public should be persuaded that gays are victims of circumstance, and that they no more chose that sexual orientation than they did their height, skin color, talents, or limitations.
And you also don't want to talk about it anymore either, because they've already achieved their victory.
Right. Yes, exactly. By the way, before I continue, and it's not much left here, I want to say that I'm actually not saying that people can per se control the urges that they get, although certainly we can through habit of thought. We can eliminate, or at least we can reduce impulses. Anyway, so to suggest in public that homosexuality might be chosen is to open the can of worms labeled moral choice and sin, and give the religious intransigents a stick to beat us with. Straights must be taught that it is as natural for some persons to be homosexual as it is for others to be heterosexual. Wickedness and seduction have nothing to do with it. And since no choice is involved, gayness can be no more blameworthy than straightness. In fact, it is simply a matter of the odds, 1 in 10, as to who turns out to be gay and who's straight. Each heterosexual must be led to realize that he might easily have been homosexual himself. So that's part of their strategy, and they have several other sorts of strategic phrases like that.
Yeah, and we see it happening in so many different levels. I mean, they're hardcore, working hard on the Black community. As a matter of fact, I just watched the video yesterday. Charlemagne, whatever, that other stuff he calls himself, Charlemagne, and there's this woman who's running for office there, and so you can see like the Black cultural elites that they're attempting to try to normalize all of these ideas in the Black community. Starting with rappers, hip hop, artists, actors, athletes. The Oscars and all these places, they have men wearing dresses, among all these other things, in the movies, the TV programs, there's so much of it going on. And so again, going back to the gay marriage debate, you can see, because all we want is marriage equality, but then everything else happens, so what you change people's sense of reality, you manipulate science or promote something that's science, which is not science. The establishment, they collude with it all, they distort reality for all of us, and then they control us, and they bring into whatever sort of type of world that they want to create, right? Unfortunately, that we become victims of it, and may Allah protect us.
I mean, we if I could just say one last thing, we have to really stress that we do not a Muslim should not, no Muslim should be rude or harsh to people in their treatment of others. We should be kind, even when if we are discussing with wisdom, advising people on issues of belief and morality and so on. We can't obviously cannot be violent towards people. That goes without saying. Anyone who is doing something like that is just acting in contrary to the way the Prophet ﷺ acted. But we also acknowledge that we live in a society where many people believe that these things are moral and that these things are acceptable. So we have to figure out a way to live together in a society with people like that, who believe those things, and who so if they can if the best way of making an arrangement would be for them to promote their point of view, and then we promote our point of view. But if they're going to demand to seize power and to crush anyone who has any dissent, I mean, that's not going to happen. As Russell Moore, who is the head of the Southern Baptist Convention, their Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, he said, Islamic, Jewish, and Christian morality when it comes to sex did not come into being through political debate, and that it is not going to be wiped out through political force.
Right.
Our beliefs are good. Our beliefs are true. They're good for everyone. Mm-hmm. The family that we support and the values and the morality that we support, if society were to adopt it, this society would be blessed, and blessings would come to this society, and we would see much less of the harmful effects of our society that we're seeing today. We have goodness. What we have to offer is good, and that's when we have to present it as that, and not just a way of. We're not just trying to be mean to people or discriminate against people.
Right, and that's a very good way to put things. I've been saying something similar over the past few weeks when I speak to Muslims, especially that we have to believe that Islam has something to offer society, right? And it seems to me that many Muslims, if not most Muslims, working nationally and with national organizations and politically, that they have abandoned this idea that this is not even at the forefront. Da'wah, it's just like. It's not even on the list of priorities.
You don't talk about it.
Listen, we want to fit in. We're just like you. We don't want you to mess with us. Just leave us alone. We can do our little prayers and things like that. So while on one hand, and I agree with you completely, that we should always try to be as nice as we possibly can be, and we also should never sacrifice truth for the sake of trying to to make people feel better, right? And this is exactly why I say that we can talk about there are problems on the right and on the left, but there's no moral equivalency between the right and the left. That the greater threat that Muslims have suffer right now are from the left, is not from the right. And these are the type of issues that make it clear to me. Because you attack my iman, attack my faith, you undermine my religion. That itself is much more dangerous than you threatening me physically, right? And because I can defend against a physical threat. So yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to add just one thing to that is that on the what is described as the right, you have actually like a spectrum, and you have a lot of people who are actually just as secular as on the right. You have people who are just so like the Breitbarts and the the Milos and these type and these type of people. So the key is for Muslims to find those like-minded people who believe in God, who believe that in the last day, who believe in the concepts of a transcendent Lord of the universe, who we all are accountable to, and who created all of us as men and women in His in His image, as the Prophet ﷺ said. So and with His own hand. And وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. So if we unite around that with those people against anyone, whether they call themselves on the right or the left, who are trying to undermine that order, that world order based on that, that's where our salvation is going to lie in this world. Yeah.
Right. I appreciate it, Ustaz Ismail. It's been great, and looking forward to more of these type of conversations. And
thank you, Khalil.
Brother Khalil, take it away. Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to thank, on behalf of the Lamppost Education Initiative, I'd like to thank both you, Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, and Ustaz Ismail Royer for having this lengthy conversation. This lengthy, detailed conversation to deal with the issues that are confronting us in America. The Lamppost Education Initiative is devoted to addressing these issues, and there are a lot of them. We are a organization, a non-profit Islamic organization that is devoted to providing Muslims with clear understanding of our deen, a clear understanding of how our deen is applied in our everyday lives. So we're asking you, the listeners, to support the Lamppost Education Initiative. Please visit our website that you now can see on the bottom of our screen here. Visit our website, follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletters. Please support the Lamppost Education Initiative. Donate to our efforts, inshallah, and this will enable us to enhance our voices, to do more in our community, and to help Muslims and to help the world, inshallah. We'd like to thank you for joining our broadcast, and please have a wonderful day. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.